You ever think about beavers? Cute little fellas, huh? Did you know that these little aquatic dam-building furballs were the topic of wealthy investors all over Europe for hundreds of years? This is one of those things you tell people, and they're just like, yeah, sure, whatever, but people came to America for a new life and tobacco and freedom and stuff. Don't worry, I thought the same thing until I saw this picture. Now, you may think this is just some guy in hats. Well, it is just some guys in hats, but these hats are felt hats made with the skin of a furry, big-toothed creature known as the beaver. These were fashionable from the 16th century all the way to the mid-19th century, and fashionable back then meant something very different than it does today. It wasn't like, oh, that's cute, I want to buy that. It was more like, wear that hat, Harold, or nobody will talk to you. Now, these damn hats created a problem for both European beavers and European humans alike. Many of these Europeans made their fortunes on the beaver, and as the Lorax taught me as a young lad, the businesses kept biggering and turning more beaver into beaver hats to find something that all people need. Now, Dr. Seuss may have been onto something. Conveniently for the hat enthusiasts of Europe, there was a whole continent nearby, full of hats just swimming around, asking to be worn. Now, it's nice for grade school and all to think that white folks came to America for all the nice reasons, like religious freedom and to escape tyrannical kings. I'm not going to pretend that that never happened, but as all my frat bro friends with business degrees will say, money runs the world and whatnot. Jamestown, Plymouth, Massachusetts Bay, and plenty of other colonies in the Americas were set up explicitly to make that sweet, sweet cheddar. Which then, of course, meant things like tobacco, timber, cotton, indigo, sugar, and of course, those pesky beavers. Now, to be fair to the beaver, there were also a market for muskrat and other lesser aquatic creatures, but thanks to the hats, beaver was king. Regardless of what a specific colony was set up to profit from, pelts were at least one of the goods leaving their ports if they existed, and they were freaking everywhere. So how did they get these beavers? Who was in charge of getting them? And what did our obsession with little beaver hats do to the continent? 3 companies would be chief in our tale of beaver murder: the Hudson Bay Company, the Northwest Company, and the American Fur Company. Obviously, the American Fur Company didn't last. Most of the beavers were up here, after all. The Hudson Bay Company was set up in 1668 on the shores of James Bay on Hudson Bay, a classic bay-in-a-bay situation where they built Fort Charles, later known as Rupert's Fort. Their location was harsh, cold, hard to get boats into and out of, food was scarce, and not to mention those damn polar bears. But gosh darn it, people wanted those hats, so this brave rich guy right here, Prince Rupert, sucked it up and got filthy rich in the process. Poor guy, but that corset really hurts. When the company brought its first load of furs back to England to be made into hats, King Charles II incorporated the Governor and Company of Adventurers of England, trading into Hudson's Bay on May 2nd, 1670. This company was given a monopoly by the English crown over a giant tract of land. King Charles just handed it to him. Enjoying this monopoly, they did as little as they could. They did do some hard work. They established inland forts at Moose Factory in 1673 and Fort Albany in 1679, with many more to follow. These forts were places the company could sit and wait for furs to come to them. Especially in the early years before the tidal wave of European immigrants, this meant waiting for the First Nations peoples to bring the furs to the company itself. Tribes like the Cree would come to the forts bearing pelts to trade for manufactured goods. This system is the protogenesis of many colonial projects in the Americas. Why settle down fully when you could just open a store and people bring you your precious hat material right to your front door? Tempting indigenous people with fancy doodads from Europe is a staple of colonization, and this company literally did this until 1987. Not 1897, 1987, the year before Die Hard was released. In those later years, the Hudson Bay Company operated trading posts in First Nations villages where they ran a monopoly on basically everything but fish, even operating as their local post office. While the Hudson Bay Company would not die hard, more like slowly get more powerful with a slight hiccup, they did have a hiccup, and its name was the Northwest Company. The Northwest Company rose to compete with the Hudson Bay Company. It's more of a small business gets eaten and merged into Amazon kind of a deal, as opposed to a king just hands you a bunch of land deal. Before the Northwest Company, as early as 1608, French traders canoed west of the St. Lawrence Basin to bring furs back to Montreal. While the English were sitting in their forts freezing their butts off, sad and alone, the French fur traders paddled into the interior, trading directly with indigenous villages. Unsurprisingly, this created a whole generation of kids born with both French and First Nations ancestry. New France, modern-day Quebec, was taken by the English in 1763, and an opportunistic Scottish investor saw profit in the French way of trading furs, specifically a man named Simon McTavish. He spent the next few years in a messy rivalry with the Hudson Bay Company, which had control over furs in Rupert's Land. Despite McTavish's attempts with Parliament to gain permission for the Northwest Company to venture into Rupert's lands for furs, he was denied again and again. This forced him to go everywhere that isn't Rupert's land. You know, all over here and here. Yeah, those beavers thought they were safe. Now this story wouldn't be complete without mentioning, in the employ of the Northwest Company and Simon McTavish was the noble voyageur. The voyageur is a very real yet almost mythical person born out of the beaver rush of the 18th and 19th century. I once wanted to be one before I realized I was far too tall, far too weak, and born 2 centuries too late. I have paddled many of the waterways they once did, and lugged many a heavy pack and canoe over their portages, as we say in America, or portages, as they say up there. This is a portage for the uninitiated, and they are grueling, even with ultralight gear. These fur trading men averaged about 5'6" and could carry 200 to 400 pounds of furs on their backs over long trails. Yeah, they were too cool for pack straps, using a single strap over their forehead called a tumplan. These men were often the children or descendants of early French fur trappers and traders who created a new ethnic group on the continent, French Canadians known as Métis. Métis? Terrible at French. It was a trade passed down through generations, at least for a short span of time, while the beaver was still easy to find. They worked along the fur trade route that stretched from Montreal down around the border of what is today the United States and Canada and into the Rainy Lake region before splitting off into the west. They wore funny hats, bright sashes, and liked to sing and smoke, all things I loved to do in my younger days. Their voyages were the epitome of the wilderness epic. They'd paddle up to 18 hours a day with heavy loads and have fun doing it. They did not personally kill all the beavers, just a few. Instead, they would bring a Scottish clerk to a village and trade knives and blankets for furs. While epic in their profession and mannerisms, these men were the tip of the spear when it came to the colonization of the far north. To be fair to them, they had no clue the impact they were having on the beaver or the human beings that lived in the wetlands of Canada. These men worked primarily for the Northwest Company, and their epic existence was short-lived for one specific reason. It turns out that those hats did not go out of style for far too long. Fancy men in France and England needed one thing for their stupid hats, and so the Hudson Bay Company and the Northwest Company just kept biggering and biggering and biggering their business, turning more beaver pelts into hats. Still, a fine something that all people need. The desire for beaver pelts pushed both the Northwest Company and the Hudson Bay Company into intense competition over the 18th and 19th centuries. My economics teacher told me that competition was good for keeping prices down. Well, good thing for all those hat guys, but bad thing for the beaver. By 1900, the North American beaver was near extinction in many regions. Now, you're probably tired of hearing me talk about beavers because, they're just cute little animals. It's the people who matter, right? Well, I cannot understate the massive impact this animal and the trade in its pelts had on people from all over the globe. Most importantly, the people right here in North America. Desire for furs led many in search of fortunes and funded and outfitted more and more expeditions into lands that were not really theirs. At the same time, settlers south of the border were moving west and waging war after war so they could build railroads and plant wheat and whatever. Just to be clear, there were people in Rupert's Land when King Charles granted his charter to Prince Rupert. Yeah, people just everywhere. Despite Canada feeling very remote, it had waterways everywhere. Villages could survive the cold winters by fishing and collecting wild rice. Honestly, it seems way easier to me to live off the land in the north than following herds of buffalo in the oppressive heat all summer long. But who am I to judge? I'm just a guy who likes water and fish. These people living throughout Rupert's Land were as vulnerable to European diseases as the people to the south. They died in staggering numbers, not to mention the strain on their resources from hungry dudes setting up forts and fishing like no tomorrow. The process happened slower than it did in the 13 colonies and appears less direct, but it happened nonetheless. When you walk away from this video, I hope you can take a look at American and Canadian history and try to think a little deeper than the platitudes we like to teach people in schools. It's easy to say that people came over in the Mayflower seeking religious freedom and didn't like the kings in Europe, but the truth is that our world is interconnected. There were people in the Americas when Europeans got here, and there was a reason that wealthy investors in Europe wanted to come here. And it is obviously more than just these stupid hats, but these stupid hats played a major role in the absolute destruction of this continent. And today, this continent is still here. You can still paddle the waterways of the Voyageur, and I encourage you to do so. But, be kind to the wilderness, please, leave no trace and all that jazz. But it's cool. It's neat. It's a great place to visit. But we should remember what it cost to the people in that region when white people showed up one day. And in the future, we should look at this as a lesson to unchecked capitalism and unchecked growth of companies, particularly when we're talking about the resources on our planet. There is only so much oil, so many trees, so many animals to be had, and there are ways to responsibly harvest some of these resources to be used in products we all use today. So I just wanted to end by saying thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments if you've paddled any of the waterways up north and what your experience was. If you enjoyed any part of this story at all, then please like and subscribe. It really helps me keep making videos, and I want to keep getting better at this and doing it. And yeah, I apologize, I don't have a good microphone. This is on my freaking phone in a small room. I will leave you now, as a good voyager, with a song. Se la veron chi no meno, c'est la veron chi no meno.